Welcome, everybody. I think I'm going to hand over to Johan so we can get started. Some people still might join as we go, but over to you, Johan.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for inviting us to do this webinar on the rights retention strategy. This is a webinar that is intended for research support organizations to explain the rights retention strategies so that you in turn can explain it to researchers at your organization. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Johan Rooryck. I'm the Executive Director of Coalition S, and I'm also an editor of a journal. Sally is the Coalition S OA expert, and she also works at Jisc. And we also have Chris Moran, who can and will instruct us about the legal basis for the rights retention strategy at some point in the presentation. So the intended audience here is organization linked to higher education research support and staff involved with supporting researchers, librarians, research office staff, and senior research support staff. Because the rights retention strategy is, it's not that complicated, but it has a number of specific steps that we are keen to explain to researchers, and that's why we organize this webinar. And there will be, of course, an occasion for questions and for discussion at the end. So the agenda is basically this. We are going to give an overview of Rights retention strategy. We're also going to talk a little bit about the resources that we put at the disposal of people who want to talk about it in their organizations. And then there will be room for question and answer. And also, as a disclaimer, I'd like to say that if there's any discrepancy between information presented here and on the Coalition S website, then the website takes precedence. You never know what kind of mistakes we may make during this presentation in the heat of the moment. So the rights retention strategy, what is the key objective of the rights retention strategy? Well, Coalition S organizations want to make sure that all the research that they publish, that their authors publish, is made available in open access with a CC BY license and without embargo. That is essential. That is the essence of Plan S. So that has to be achieved one way or another. And to ensure that we have developed a rights retention strategy because it is our backstop or backup strategy in a way to make sure that researchers can publish in any journal of their choice, including subscription or hybrid journals, which we do not support financially. So this is a way for us to provide funded researchers with the means to retain sufficient rights to their work, because the idea is that we ask researchers to deposit a version of their work in a repository, while in fact the final article is published behind a paywall, but they have to retain sufficient rights on the penultimate version of the article and deposit that in the repository. And of course, we also do this in order to encourage subscription publishers to find options to publish in open access. So as you know, we want to move the academic publishing from subscription system to a complete open access system. And we want to move them away from the subscription options, which are paywalled options and which are no longer in keeping with the times, we believe. So we are seeking to move them to sign transformative agreements on the one hand, and also to take part in our program of transformative journals, to move these journals to open access as quickly as possible. That is another goal that we have. At the outset, we should say that, of course, we prefer an open access version of record whenever that is possible. So we are also willing to pay for that as Coalition S organization. And so we only require the AAM author accepted manuscripts to be made open access when there is no Plan S aligned way to make the version of record open access. So that is very important for us. It's really a backstop. If a journal or a publisher develops a way via transformative journals or transformative arrangements or agreements to move the journal to open access, we will pay for that version of record. If they refuse to do that and the journal remains either hybrid or a subscription journal, then we will exercise the rights to take the AAM and deposit in a repository without embargo and with a CC BY license. And of course, we encourage institutional repositories to hold a copy of either the AAM or the VOR, and that is also one of the reasons that we're talking to you, so that you know exactly where you can intervene in the process, so to speak. What is the problem that we seek to resolve with this? Well, the minimum requirement is that for us is that the author accepted manuscript be deposited in a repository with zero embargo and a CC BY license. That is the last strategy that allows us to make sure that all of the research is available in open access, all of the research that we fund. This has now become an obligation to the Coalition S organizations grant agreement. So the grant agreements now stipulated all the work has to be available in open access by one of the routes that we specify, but in this specific case, it is by deposit of the AAM in a repository. And the problem, of course, that we have is the contradiction that exists between on the one hand, the agreement with the publishers, where authors will have agreed with the agreement, with the funders, where authors will have agreed with the contract that they sign with the funder that they will make sure that the work is made available open access. And on the other hand, the copyright agreement that they sign later on with the publishers that requires them to transfer some of these rights, that gives away their rights. And this contradiction is something that we try to solve with the right retention strategy, and we'll tell you how in a minute. So basically, this is an infographic that we developed to show how things work. First of all, of course, there's the funder agreement, and the funder agreement stipulates that at least the EAMs need to be made available with the CC BY license and no embargo. That means that in our scheme of things, the author has to inform the publisher that the AAM arising from the submission is licensed CC BY in accordance with the grant open access conditions that they signed on to. And when the paper is accepted, the author will have to immediately deposit that AAM in an open access repository conforming to the grant conditions that they signed. Afterwards, they can sign another copyright agreement with the publisher. It does not matter. The previous agreement will take precedence over the later one. That is very important. So the version of record can end up with the publisher. They can publish it. They can publish it behind the paywall for whatever we care. But we will have secured the rights. We will have secured the rights on the AAM for the author. That's why we call it the rights retention strategy. The author retains rights on the AAM. All right, so how does this work? How have we made it work? And Wellcome has been extremely instrumental in realizing this, especially Chris. Namely, first of all, we update the grant conditions and we notify the beneficiaries. We notify also publishers of these changes because the publishers, of course, it's a matter of fairness. Publishers have to know that we have changed these grant conditions, and publishers have to know that those authors are funded by Coalition as funders. And then finally, we will require beneficiaries in their submission to the publishers to include details of the public license that's been applied. So basically, publishers will have been notified twice. On the one hand, by the Coalition S organization saying, look, all our researchers in future will claim a CC BY license on the AAM. You are hereby notified. And on the other hand, by the individual authors, because of course, publishers cannot know which authors are funded by which organizations. The authors themselves will have to stipulate in each of their submissions that the AAM arising from this submission will have a CC BY license attached to it without embargo. That is those two steps are crucial in the strategy. So how does it work? We've changed these grant conditions saying, look, you have to apply a CC BY license to all your future work. Supported in whole or in part by our funding. And secondly, you will have to specify the public copyright license that's been applied and the source of the funding so that the publisher knows this author works under a mandate from this funder and has applied the public copyright license that we already have been notified about. And of course, the contract will now also mandate that the manuscripts be made available in a repository at the moment of publication. So that is the way the grant conditions have changed. What we also did is contact publishers over the summer. So our rights retention strategy came out mid-July, and since then we have talked to about 99 publishers who publish jointly about 95% of our research. And we have been working to communicate this approach to them by webinars, by talking to publisher trade bodies. So, and we have also invited in our initial letter of 15th of July, we have invited these publishers to reply, to respond, and to say how they would treat articles that came on their doorstep with these conditions on the AAM. We've given them a choice of 5 options. And that information will be incorporated in the journal checker tool that will be available as of tomorrow, I'm proud to say. So that will be open and available for the entire community to check how journals are compatible with the various strategies that we allow in Coalition S to make research available in open access. So that's the second step, notifying the publisher, and that's been done. Publishers have been given proper notice. And the third step is what we ask researchers to do, and that is basically this, to say, for instance, we ask researchers to include templated language in their submission, which is no longer just saying we are funded by funder grant so and so, but also add the language that you see in yellow there, that the CC BY license is applied to the AAM or the VOR arising from this submission in accordance with the grant's open access conditions. So that is an important one, because that again reinforces the message, publisher, you know about this, I work under these conditions. If you don't like it, tell me. You have the right, of course, to refuse my submission, but then you have to tell me now. That is the idea here. This is, for instance, an example of the Wellcome grant conditions. That's a case study. So this is what grant holders must do. They must make available the peer-reviewed journal articles in PubMed Central. They sign on to this second condition as well, that CC BY public copyright license will have to be applied to the AAMs, and that all the submissions must contain the following statement. So this is just part of the agreement that Wellcome signs with all of their grant holders. The publisher's response form is the one that we gave them options for. So the first option is there is no change necessary. This is, for instance, the case of the Royal Society and the Microbiology Society, who already allow authors to have a CC BY license on their work and to deposit the AAM in a repository of their choice. So there's no problem there. Then options 2 and 3 are options that allow the publishers to update their publishing conditions. So they will update these conditions for all authors or only for Coalition S authors, and allow these authors to deposit the AAM in a repository very explicitly. Then there's options 4 and 5, and options 4 and 5 are basically, well, the publisher acknowledges that they have been given notice, and they simply accept without that Coalition S authors will make their work open access, but they do not change their policy. So that's basically, we close our eyes, we don't want to know about it, but we allow it, right? And then option 5 is really what we call the don't darken our doors again option, namely they ask us to explicitly say that they will not accept any manuscripts that carry this language. That is the option number 5. And it's important to know that none of the publishers have explicitly stated that last option. I mean, they have tried to talk us into it, but that has not really materialized. So what do authors need to do? They simply need to inform the publisher with this magical language, so to speak, that really informs the publisher that this manuscript will be subject to the conditions, to these conditions on the AAM, CC BY license, and deposit in a repository. And on publication, of course, authors have to indeed deposit that AAM or the VOR, if permitted, in a repository. We have developed a number of resources for this, which you can find on our website. We have the infographic. We have a handout, we have slides at your disposal that you can use to explain this to your community or the researchers that are in your purview. And we invite you to take advantage of these materials as you wish. They are, for obvious reasons, they are CC BY, but so you can adapt them as you wish. Now I will hand over. I will give the floor to Chris, who will explain to you how this works from a legal perspective.
Thanks, Johan. The kind of the full explanation is given on the slide. So rather than reading it out, I'll sort of talk around it a little bit to try and explain some of the terminology. The strategy works really for two separate reasons. The first is that it's perfectly possible to deal with future copyrights. An easy way to explain this is that most, I suspect, all of us in our employment contracts will have signed away copyrights to future work. So anything we create in the future for our employers typically would be owned by that employer. So it's well recognized that you can do deals in relation to copyright works which are created in the future. The second element of the strategy is that an earlier deal in relation to copyright, and here we're talking about licenses, will trump any subsequent deal, provided that whoever you're dealing with at a later date has knowledge of what you've done in the past. So in this case, if an academic author has assigned a CC BY to a work and then communicates that fact to the publisher, then any copyrights that the publisher takes are subject to that earlier license of which they were told, of which they had knowledge. So putting the two together, what we're asking the academics, the authors to do here is to clearly let the publishers know that they have already assigned a CC BY license to a future work, specifically the author accepted manuscript that arrives from their submission, or that arises from, sorry, their submission. So we get in there early with a broad public license to that work. We refer to this internally as the magic language, as Johan referred to it, and it's magic in the sense that it's very important. This is the statement by which the authors communicate, give notice to the publishers to say, this prior license already exists. So any copyrights I'm giving to you, the publisher, they're subject to what I've already done in the past. And we've tested that strategy across a number of jurisdictions. In the UK, it's exceedingly clear because we have a statute that basically refers to just this sort of activity, but it's broadly applicable as a legal strategy. So we're confident it's going to work in a wide number of jurisdictions, if not all of them. And it's quite logical in the sense that if you let someone know that you're giving them some rights, but it's subject to what you've already done, it's very difficult for them to argue later on that they didn't know about that or that somehow wasn't fair to them. So the strategy is very transparent. It's all based on explaining to publishers quite clearly what the situation is and on what basis they can take a submission. And obviously we're hopeful that it will enable, as Johan mentioned, authors to submit to journals where there isn't a preferred way of doing it, i.e. we can't pay to get the version of record open access.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And now I'm going to give the floor to Sally to explain some other frequently asked questions.
Thank you, Johan. The initial submission is not covered by the CC BY license. It's the accepted manuscript that's covered by it. It'd be far too complicated to try and assign the license earlier on in the process. But the important thing is that the author informs the publisher at the time of their submission to the journal, so that when the accepted manuscript exists, it's already covered by the CC BY license. So they need to do it at the time of submission, but it doesn't cover that early submitted version. The next slide, please, Johan. So we don't anticipate there'll be vast numbers of disagreements. We will see, but if a publisher spotted a version in a repository and they decided that they weren't happy about that and they issued a notice for the full text to be taken down from the repository, the repository can direct any requests for takedown where there's a disagreement or confusion to their appropriate funder. The funders are willing to investigate to ascertain whether that notice and takedown request should be adhered to or refuted. What they will do is they will check whether the publisher was given suitable prior notice of the conditions of the accepted manuscript. And I should say that authors are not expected to investigate if there is some form of disagreement. Thank you, Johan. And there's plenty of information on.
Yeah.
Do you want to carry on now?
No, go ahead, Sally.
There's plenty of further information on the Coalition S website. We're constantly updating and clarifying and making sure that people have the information that they need. And it's one of the reasons for doing these webinars is so that you can ask questions and we can clarify what we're doing and why. And the discussions that we're having here will feed into any further FAQs and information that we put on the website.
Yes, and as I said, the journal checker tool, which is here shown in development, the first development phase will end tomorrow. So the tool will be at everyone's disposal in a beta format to check if it works. And we are keen to have any reactions, of course. So tomorrow is a very important day for us, because that journal checker tool will allow you to check for any journal of your choice to see whether it offers a compliant route towards open access. So whether you have to pay a fee or whether the journal is under a transformative agreement or whether indeed you have to have recourse to the rights retention strategy and deposit the AAM in a repository. But I think we can move to questions now. I'll try to escape from my yes, if you have further questions, you can always write to us if you have any further questions. Thank you. I didn't have a chance to see the chat. I see a question. So this should save funders money. No need to pay for gold for Wellcome, for example. Well, that is not exactly our purpose, actually. We would save money if we only applied the rights retention strategy. But as I said from the start, we are very willing to pay for gold if that gives us access to the version of record that is maintained and curated by the publisher and that has all the bells and whistles. So we recognize that the version of record is a version that is superior to the AAM. For us, the AAM is a fallback position. So exercising our rights on the AAM and having the author deposit that in a repository is a fallback position. It's not our preferred option. And it will be also indicated like that in the journal checker tool. So it's not necessarily about saving money. It could be about saving money for other countries and jurisdictions that do not wish to have this particular preference, I should say. Because as you can see, the rights retention strategy has been developed by Coalition S, but it is not an exclusive right of Coalition S. This is something that could easily be applied by any funder or any country or any institution, really. A university could decide for their own researchers that they want their researchers to apply the rights retention strategy, that they mandate their researchers to apply it. And then a university could indeed save some money. But this is not the option that Coalition S has taken, so I want to be very clear about that. Presumably all preprints should include the CC BY declaration too. Sally, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's the case. I mean, for us, it's really about, so preprints are typically not peer-reviewed, right? I mean, so for us, it's really about the peer-reviewed final version, author-accepted manuscript, post-peer review. that is the one that has to be CC licensed, CC BY licensed.
That's correct. And it's the version that's submitted. So the submitted version should hold the text,
Yes,
the special text.
Yes. Yeah.
But the point being that the text will apply to any future accepted manuscript that arises out of that submitted version. That's the point.
Yeah.
But it has to go in at submission. That's the key thing.
Exactly. But a preprint deposited in the repository itself need not contain that language because it doesn't have that final status, or it does not aspire to that final status. It's only the submission that has to carry it. Okay. Yes, it is essential for each submitted manuscript to include the wording about the CC BY license on the EAM. If, of course, you know that you are going to submit to a journal that is either a subscription journal or a hybrid OA journal. If you're submitting to a gold open access journal, of course, it does not matter to include that language because you know that it's going to be CC BY and without embargo.
Oh, Johan, can I just chip in there? And Chris, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but if the author forgets to put in the special wording, providing the, at least the special wording about the accepted manuscript, providing the funder knows it was funded by, for example, Wellcome, and they were notified previously by Coalition S, so in the activity that happened over the summer, then they should still be able to comply with the rights retention mechanism. So it's the sort of belt and braces, them putting everything in, that covers everything, that's clear. But if they should fail, providing they know which funder it was and they were previously notified. But Chris, please do clarify that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there, Sally. Obviously, we want to be as fair and transparent with the publishers as we can. And you can almost never give too much notice of something. So it is very important that the authors include the language. However, if they don't, and if they merely tell the publisher, I'm funded by Wellcome, then we have a fallback where we can say to the publisher, look, you know, we spoke to you this date, we sent you this letter, you know that anyone funded by Wellcome is subject to this rights retention strategy, and so will have applied a CC BY license. It's just a bit more of a convoluted argument and not quite as strong. So I wouldn't want to encourage authors to skimp on the wording. I think let's make it easier for the publishers. Let's include the notice and be as transparent as we can.
And we should add that the authors should already be acknowledging the funder in their work. This is not a change. They should already be putting that in.
Yes, we are just asking to add these 20 words to make sure that the author retain their right. So this is also a question from Mandy to everyone. Does application of CC BY carry with it the right to make OA with zero embargo? Yes, it does. The idea is basically that even if the author, even if the publisher does not allow it and tells you that they don't allow it, it does not matter because you have the prior license. You have announced that you had the prior license. The prior agreement with the funder takes precedence over anything that is signed later on. That's the idea. If a takedown is issued, legally institutions have to take it down immediately pending investigation. That is true, but we recommend institutions to immediately contact the funder because the funder will take care of it. So,
can I just come in there? We realise that that repositories probably already have a notice and takedown policy of their own, and many that I am aware of often take down from view the full text whilst they investigate. Now, we don't want to make life even more complicated for repository people, so we're saying that, you know, just abide by your own practice at that point. And
yeah, I see Alice has an interesting question here. Lots of UKRI funded authors and launching a new repository next week. Should they need to wait before letting authors know they can include this magic language? Well, I would say no, you don't have to wait. You can decide this as an institution yourself. I mean, what UKRI decides in the end is independent, so to speak, of what you can decide for your own institution. So if you can make it work for your institution, by all means do, I would say. You say,
Johan, I'd say this. Sorry, Johan. I'd say the same applies not just to institutions but to individuals. So we're saying to our authors, you have to put this language in there to comply with your grant conditions. But that doesn't stop someone who's not funded by Wellcome from just deciding that they want to make sure their work is openly accessible and they can apply the CC BY license.
Yes.
They wish to.
It's just a bit stronger, of course, that if it's backed up by an institution, because then they can say, look, I work for this institution wants me to do this, you know, this is, but of course you can also do it personally. Indeed, that's the beauty of the rights retention strategy. I think it is not restricted to Coalition S. Is there a list of publishers who have selected options 2 and 3? No, not yet. I mean, we are still we are still busy implementing that, but all of this will be available through the journal checker tool. So you, as of tomorrow, you will be able to check whether your favorite journal has to make use of the journal checker tool. We will not include as much detail as the 5 options that we mentioned for simplification purposes. But suffice it to say that no publisher has selected option 5 explicitly. So that basically means that grudgingly or gladly, they have decided to let this happen, shall we say. Some journals strong preprint service for manuscripts and allow you to auto-submit to journals. Yes, it would. In that case, indeed, Frank, it would be safer to include the text in all preprints as well. Yes, I didn't know of this practice, but yes, I mean, I thought that at least journals would have to ask the author for permission to do that. But in those cases, I totally agree. Maybe Sally, we should include a frequently asked question to that effect in our guidance, because I think that seems like an important issue.
It's a good idea, yes.
Thank you, Frank. That's a good one. I didn't know about this auto submit option. Please, could you share a location for the pencil timeline visualization? Yes, it is. So it is on our website under the resources for the rights retention strategy. I think I included that in the presentation, but we will share the presentation with you after this discussion, if that's okay. Simple location, make it easier. Should always authors always do this? Yes, but like I said, we will advise authors to use the journal checker tool, and the journal checker tool will tell them what to do exactly.
I think it's a good point, that though. Just tell everybody to always include it, and then you belt and braces, you're safe on everything.
Can you confirm which UK funders this applies to? Well, it will apply to Wellcome as of 1st of January. UKRI is still pending because there is a review pending, so that will probably be April of next year at the earliest. Am I correct, Sally? I think it is. I always have to.
That's right. Yeah, they're expecting when April, I think.
Right?
Yeah.
Multiple funders and mixed adoption. Yes. Well, it doesn't matter if work is in whole or in part funded. It will have to apply. It's incumbent on the authors to make sure that their co-authors comply with the policy that the funder of that single author, of that particular author, has signed on to. That is, it doesn't matter whether there's more authors or not. It's any author funded partly by us has to abide by these rules.
And presumably there'll be an agreement at the outset of the research where the grant agreement is signed by the institution.
Yeah.
And so just going back to, I was going to say, just going back to the previous question about the funders and which UK funders, there is a roadmap on the Coalition S website which says who's doing what when, which will help you.
Yes, that is correct. The problem of between joint articles between, for instance, UKRI industry is a difficult one. It really depends on how the industry is how industry wants to go about this. But in principle, in principle, this will be asked of any of our authors, overriding other concerns. Is it correct that funding will always be available for funded authors publishing in Plan S compliant journals? Yes, depending on the funder. Not all funders have funding available all of the time for all of the authors, but mostly yes. Mostly the answer is yes for our funders. Is there a difference between general funder acknowledgements when there is no grant? Perhaps using prior funded data and acknowledgement when there is a coalition. I'm not sure I understand, Monique, I'm not sure that I understand this question. Monique Ritchie, is there a difference between general funder acknowledgement where there is no grant? Perhaps using prior funded data and acknowledgement where there is a coalition funder grant cited. Well, if I understand the question correctly, yes. I mean, Coalition S is requiring this language for all authors who want to publish in a subscription or in a hybrid OA journal. That is a requirement. If there is no grant, then the author can choose to do this, like Chris said before, right? I mean, the author can choose to adopt this strategy in order to make sure that they retain their rights on that AAM, or they can choose not to do it. That is if, I mean, our policy applies to our authors, of course.
Johan, can I just pick up a point from
Yes,
Leah's previous question about accessing the funding for paying for publishing fees? It will depend on the publication because, and on the funder, I think, because that Wellcome Trust gives a block grant to the institutions to pay for it. Then there are some journals which come under a transformative agreement. So the library in your institution will have an agreement. For example, in the UK, Jisc brokers agreements on behalf of institutions. So it will differ, but it will depend on your institution and on the journal. So again, use the journal checker tool and check with your library what's available to you.
Okay, there's still a question by Kirsten Radford that she didn't quite catch how funded authors have been notified of their new obligation. They have been notified by their funders. So for instance, at Wellcome, all grantees have been notified of these changes. For other funders, it applies to new grants that will be awarded as of January 2021. And so that language will be included in the new contracts. So it doesn't apply to the old contracts. So it is really different from funder to funder. The way in which this strategy is implemented is slightly different from funder to funder. And also the timeline is slightly different. And as Sally said, we have a list on our website how every funder is applying this and how it is implemented.
I'm putting it in the chat now.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. Will the content of the journal checker tool be made available as an API to incorporate into other internal systems? I believe yes, but I'm not sure. But I believe it will be. I mean, I think I saw something about that, but since I was not involved in making the journal checker tool, I am not 100% certain, but I think I saw something come by about an API. And obviously, I mean, we will have we will have a hotline there to for you to add information to say, no, this is not right. Oh, I know about the transformative agreement that applies to this journal. Can you, and this is where you can find it, and so on and so forth. I mean, the journal checker tool will not be complete and perfect from the start. I mean, it will have to be tested extensively to see whether we have all the right information. It is based on available information.
It's also worth adding that the journal checker tool is taking some of its data from existing resources where it doesn't have to keep it up to date itself. So for example, it's taking some data from the ESAC registry of transformative agreements.
For transformative agreements, it takes data from ESAC. For the open access journals, it takes the data from DOAJ. It also takes data from Open Access Button. So there's a number of sources that we use to make sure that we get the right data. And of course, we ask publishers to update their data in such a way that they are available to the journal checker tool.
Johan, there was a question a little higher up the chain around whether any consideration has been given of whether institutions need to change their IP and employment policies to accommodate the RRS.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
Particularly if an
Why
institution.
why don't you answer it, Chris?
I can have a go at that one. We have looked at this probably more from a funder's perspective than across Coalition S as a whole. But I would say that we're trying to find a system with rights retention, we think we have, that works for a lot of different situations. So in some institutions, it's the academic that owns the copyright. In fact, that's broadly the case. But in others, it's the institution. Sometimes the funder is funding an academic. Sometimes the funder is funding an institution. So there's a sort of matrix of different possibilities there. The way that Wellcome has approached it is our grant conditions are with the institution. So in our revised grant conditions, we ask the institution to apply the CC BY license. And then we say, however, if they allow others, i.e. academics, to own copyright in their papers, which is often the case in the UK, the institution will ensure that such a license is granted. So we're trying to kind of cover both bases there. It's actually very easy to grant the CC BY license, however. All the academic needs to do is add the wording that we've asked, this magic language, and that by itself creates the license. So effectively all things are solved by the academics including the suggested wording. It helps the academic comply with the grant conditions, it helps the institution do the same, it avoids potential arguments with the publishers because it's very transparent to them. So it's another reason to stick with the suggested language.
Yes, as you will understand, I mean, we are very keen for all sorts of institutions to adopt this because researchers, of course, will always be between two fires, so to speak, right? On the one hand, the funder or the institution, and on the other hand, the publisher who wants something from them. So if the institution backs up the author in saying, look, we are really 100% against, 100% behind open access and behind this rights retention strategy, that makes the position of the author with respect to the publisher that much stronger. And that's why we're very keen for institutions to adopt this as well. Sometimes that is easier to do than in others, as Chris suggests, right? When you give a block grant and you make it a condition of the block grant, well, it makes it easy. Is there another question? Chris, this is Chris Morrison's question. Yeah.
Yes, and so Chris, there you mentioned the UK scholarly license, and in many ways, rights retention strategy is a similar beast, just being deployed via funders rather than institutions themselves. So yes, we sort of leveraged some of the hard work that the UK SCL had done and some of the ideas they come up with in generating rights retention.
There's a question about the list of publishers that were contacted. We have decided not to do that because we would get all sorts of questions of why didn't you contact X and Y. Like I said, there is a long tail of smaller publishers that we didn't publish. We really focused on 150 publishers, large ones that published 95% of our output. But we never meant to be exhaustive. Of course, I mean, if you know of a publisher who would be interested in this, you can ask them to publish us, to contact us, and we will do what is required. But we thought it was not wise for all sorts of reasons to share the list. This has a 0 embargo. How does it work? Publishers have non-embargoes for AEM. Yes, this text overrides that. That is exactly right. This text overrides that. So even if the author signs it, it doesn't matter because the previous license applies. That's the beauty of it, I find. I mean, it does not matter because it's the earlier license takes precedence over any later one that might be signed. Okay, any more questions via chat or live?
Looks like there's no further questions.
I think there was one. Maybe.
There's one.
Here comes one. Sorry.
Great. Is it possible to have suggested wording that institutions can incorporate? What kind of wording would you like, Alice? I mean, we are happy to provide wording. Would it be wording supporting this strategy? Is that the idea, or?
I think, Johan, I'm going to chip in with the a link to the resources here, because there's some, you can use the wording from the resources.
Okay.
And please feel free to quote that.
Yes. And then Alice has another question. Since all publishers that were contacted have accepted, well, it's not that they have accepted. I mean, that would be presumptuous, I believe. I mean, I wish that were true. They have been notified, and they have also in some cases told us that we could not make any assumptions about their positions with respect to this, but it doesn't matter. They were notified. They know about it. So, I mean, for us, the most important thing is that none of them said, do not darken our doors with your manuscripts again. We do not want to see you. That is the important thing. Do we have wording for legal departments? Chris, do we have wording for legal departments?
Do we have wording for legal departments to make sure they get on board? No, we don't. I'm not sure technically that an institution's legal department will need to get on board. I'm not quite sure what that's driving at. It's really down to the author and the communication between the author and the publisher. I'm trying to think of a situation where a university's legal team will get involved. It would only really be if a publisher went back to an author and said, look, you've signed up to my publishing agreement and now you've self-archived. I'm not happy about that. The academic would have to say, well, look, I told you in the submission that I'd already granted this CC BY license to everyone, so what are you complaining about? That might be a point where the legal department of the institution got involved. And I think at that stage, we'd encourage them to reach out to the relevant funder. Communicated the strategy, as Johan said, we've given notice to a lot of publishers. They haven't all necessarily come back and said, yes, we're fully supportive of this. So, you know, who knows, one of them might test the water in a year's time or after this has gone live next year to see if they can push back on it. And if that happens, we'd love to hear and we'll help as much as we can to try and resolve any issues.
Yeah, I see a question from Lizzie as well. I mean, there's these automated systems, and yes, we will have to explain to our authors that they can simply click through. I mean, even I had to be persuaded, Lizzie, that this was a possibility, that you just click through and you just don't pay attention.
No, to be honest, this is something that we suspect as funders already happens quite a lot. So a lot of funders already have OA policies. A lot of them aren't necessarily consistent with publishing agreements. So we suspect there's already quite a lot of conflict between publication agreements and OA strategies.
I think the point that Lizzie's making is the fact that these submission systems don't let you proceed unless you click, I agree. And that's where an author will get very anxious, I think, if they think they're doing something. But
that's why I think we simply have to tell authors not to worry. And to say, look, I mean, it's fine. You are backed up by the earlier agreement. Yeah, but I do understand the worry there. That is definitely one. Ragnar has a question about high-ranking journal who may refuse the magic language. That is true. They may refuse that. as I said, we have not yet received word from any publishers that they will indeed refuse the publications from our authors. And we've asked them to. I mean, they had a chance to provide us with that information, and we've offered to include that information in the journal checker tool. So if they do that, they would have to do that later then. But I mean, that's a risk we are taking indeed. Yes, thinking about putting a guidance for authors and rushing it past legal department. What is the position?
Yeah, I mean, as a lawyer, I would say it's always a good idea to run things past your legal department. But yeah, probably make sure they're aware of the funders' terms and conditions. Take a look at the magic language. Make sure they're happy for their academics to include that.
Yeah, look, we are aware that this is quite a muscular approach towards the publishers, right? I mean, and they are not happy about it. I mean, let me also make that clear. But yeah, we have made sure that this is backed up legally quite in a quite solid way. So, yeah.
And we've also stressed, and Johan's mentioned already today, that this is effectively the fallback strategy. So the preference, certainly for funders like Wellcome, is that the version of record is made open access, and we're putting aside a lot of money to fund that.
I see a question by Annette. What is the position if a publisher is not one that was contacted or not in the checker? Well, if a publisher is not in the checker, they can contact us and we can put them in. That is not an issue. And the rights retention strategy is in fact completely independent of whether the publisher is or is not in the publisher. It's better if they are indeed notified by us. So if you see any publishers that you think are important for your community and that you think we should contact, please do inform us and we will do so. Because the strategy really works on these two items, right? The publisher needs to be notified and the author needs to separately notify the publisher. So if you can think of any, please do inform us.
I think though, Johan, as you were saying, that anybody can use this. That if the author were to include the magic wording in their submission, it doesn't really matter if the publisher was contacted beforehand or not, and whether it's in the checker tool. If they use that magic language, then they're good to go.
Yeah, that is true. But it's ideal, of course. I mean, as Chris has said, it's ideal if we have the two-pronged approach, if the publishers know it ahead of time and. But yes, I mean, the latter approach would also work. Yes, if they use the language and the publisher agrees. Yes, the publisher can refuse to publish. That is absolutely true. That is in their remit. But as I said, we have heard of no publisher until now who has chosen that route. I mean, could still happen. I mean, it's still a ways off until 31st of December. And I think a lot of us will have a sigh of relief when 31st of December rolls around. But we will see. General comments. Yes, we will. We will have to repeat the message continually. Exactly. And that is also why we run these webinars with you. Yeah, and with publishers and with every community who wants to talk to us, because it is a message that needs to be repeated and repeated until it's internalized. It needs to be it needs to be simply something that you do because it's the right thing to do. It's part of your practice. Can compliance be achieved respectively by authors who fail to assert the RRS ahead of publication?
I can have a go at that one, Johan. It's certainly going to be difficult. The rights retention strategy hinges on this prior license to the public. In a situation where an academic had stated they were funded, for example, by Wellcome, but forgot the expanded new language, we would have the fallback position of saying, well, Wellcome has told the publishers that all of our funders, all of our award holders are covered by this approach, and we would try and rely on that. If they forgot the acknowledgements entirely, so they didn't say who they were funded by and they didn't say it was CC BY, what they could reasonably do at that point is ask the publisher to bail them out of the jam they got into. If the publisher refused, then the funder wouldn't challenge that. I mean, we respect the fact that if a publisher is given a paper and has no knowledge of a prior license, that they can't be held to that. So that would be a situation where the academic had complied with the letter of the publishing agreement, but had not complied with their funder's OA policy. So there might be some sanction from the funder, but not much else to be done there.
Any further questions? To make this easier for us. Ah, yes. No way policy. We need to let the publishers know. We'll bring this question back and discuss it with some others in coalition as whether we can make that list of publishers, whether we can share that list of publishers at least confidentially. We'll see what we can do, Sally and I. No promises. Any more questions? If not, I would like to thank you all for being here today. We received a lot of very interesting questions. That was quite challenging. It's always fun when it is challenging. Thank you very much for being here today. And if you have any more questions, do not hesitate to write to us at Coalition as either Sally or Chris or myself, or at our general address. So thank you very much. Thank you, Nicole, for hosting this.
It's a pleasure.
So goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.